It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Ghostbusters 2, Monster Truck, Roadster, Soreyuke, Amida-kun, and Radar Mission. Let's start the show.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night?
Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost?
If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up your phone and call the professionals. Go Ghostbusters! Our courteous and efficient staff is on call 24 hours a day to serve all your supernatural elimination needs.
We're ready to believe you!
Ghostbusters 2 DMG-GB, developed by HAL Laboratory and published by HAL Laboratory in Japan and Activision in North America and Europe. Good movies have something of a notoriety for producing pretty uninspired video games. It's maybe a little generous to call the second Ghostbusters film good, certainly compared to the first one, but even so, the 8-bit era gave us some rather horrendous Ghostbusters games. Except, that is, in Europe. The Master System title followed the same idea as the god-awful North American NES release, but was definitely a better version of it. The PAL-exclusive NES title New Ghostbusters 2 is, on the other hand, an excellent game that North America really missed out on. This Game Boy game is, thankfully, a rendition of the good one. The storyline follows the second film. The evil tyrant Vigo is trying to resurrect himself, but he needs a human child to do so. His possessed servant, Janus Pohar, played by Peter McNichol, is tasked with kidnapping Sigourney Weaver's baby, Oscar. The Ghostbusters gotta get him back. You first choose 2 of the 4 main Ghostbusters. There's no difference between the characters except for the sprites. They really look like the film characters. Bill Murray's receding hairline and Harold Ramis's spectacles give a glorious charm to the overall look of the game. The aim is to progress through the various stages by capturing a specific number of ghosts within the time limit. The first character that you choose is the one that you control, and primarily you're using the proton beam. Press A to fire the beam at a ghost, which paralyzes it. The second character is the AI that accompanies you, and he carries the trap box. You need to paralyze the ghosts and then hold B to try to get the AI partner to vacuum them. The AI isn't always great. They'll follow you around as best they can, but will often get stuck or lost, so try not to leave them behind. Trapping an enemy in the proton beam is easy enough, but you then often have to maneuver to one side to give your body enough room to suck it up. It's not immediately intuitive, but you soon get used to it. Ghosts are varied and each have their own threats. Some, like the Slimers, are easy enough to trap and capture. Others, such as the clown things and the spinning marionettes, are really quick and not always visible, so you have to be alert the whole time in order to not get caught out. Along the way, you'll come across several of the other characters, some of which swap out with your frontman, giving temporary access to some other weapons. These can allow you to fire a flamethrower style thing or use the vacuum trap without having to trap ghosts. Some other characters give you lives or temporary shields. You can also find pickaxes, which allow you to carve through walls, and a ghost suit that allows you to pass through any obstacle for a short while. You faithfully follow the storyline of the film, including a cutscene of the famous bit where the team use an NES Advantage to pilot the Statue of Liberty over 3 levels of multiple floors, through the courthouse, sewer, and museum scenes. After a handful of floors, you'll fight bosses, including the Scoleri brothers, the Ghost Train, Janus, and finally Vigo himself. The game looks absolutely delightful and is accompanied by a great soundtrack. Some may find the noise of the proton beam a smidge annoying, and they'd be justified in that feeling, but I don't mind it too much. I have to commend the originality of this one. A bloody brilliant title that flips the good movie, bad game trend right around. Monster Truck DMG-MTA, developed by Another and published by Very. This is not the same thing as Monster Truck Wars, released much later in all regions except Japan in 1994. Nor is it related to Monster Trucks, or even Monster Truck Madness, both Game Boy Advance titles. No, this is worse. Much worse. You race against 4 other trucks, although you only ever see one of them at any one time, along a series of assault courses filled with jumps, logs, rubble, and other monster trucky obstacles. Your beast can wheelie by pressing left or right, depending on which axle you want to balance on. Supposedly this helps you traverse the hazards. The intention was clearly to create some Excite Bike or Motocross Maniacs kind of deal here, but Monster Truck comes nowhere remotely close to either of those games. Firstly, your movement is so irritatingly slow that it doesn't even feel like a racing game. I know monster trucks are not the speediest of vehicles, but they could have been an aside at the illusion. You accelerate with B, but the rate it takes to get up to even your pathetic top speed is a joke. At first I thought I was doing something wrong, but no, that's how it was programmed. Slow as it feels you might be going, it apparently isn't slow enough. You cannot race towards any of the obstacles, you have to slow to a dead crawl to avoid doing this bonkers backflip upon contact with even the smallest log. You'd imagine that leaning your car forwards or backwards would help in navigating these bumps, but that's because you played Motocross Maniacs already. That makes absolutely no difference here. It exists only so that once your speed has dropped down to 0, you then have to tilt your truck back to climb over it. Not actually possible from a stationary position IRL. Heck, I'm not able to do justice to how bad the programming is here. Just play it out of morbid curiosity. You'll see what I'm driving at within around 30 seconds. When overtaking an opponent, rapidly tap upwards to ram them and spin them. If you don't, they'll do it to you, and you crash every time. Sometimes they do it right from the start, before you even have control over your own car. It's cheap stuff like that I hate more than probably anything in a video game. The game hampering you unfairly without giving you a chance to respond. That's the only semblance of competitiveness you'll get from them. Otherwise, they drive even slower than you do. The graphics are lame, everything is way too dark, which is fine on an emulator, but try playing this on your DMG, I dare you. Even at the highest gamma setting, it's so hard to see anything. Don't worry though, you're not missing out on any graphical mastery by any stretch. If the graphics suck, the sound quality actually hurts. One 10-second song loop and no engine noise. In a racing game, a fact that beggars belief. Usually with dud games, there's a redeeming factor to be found. It's really, really hard to say anything positive about Monster Truck. It's a lot rarer. I say rare rather than hard to find, which would indicate someone was actually looking for it, and a lot more expensive than the 1994 release, so you're unlikely to get them mixed up. That's as good as I can do, sorry. Also, it's a lie, because that's exactly how I came to own the game. Roadster DMG-RSA, developed by Toze and published by Tonkin House. Released on the same day, in the same genre, and exclusive to the same region as, up to now anyway, officially the worst Game Boy game in existence, comes another racing game. Thankfully, Roadster is much better. In fact, I dare say this one is actually pretty good. Once I figured out the controls, that is. The first few races I wondered why everyone was so much faster than me. My car would reach 112 kilometers an hour and no higher, regardless of which character I chose, while everyone else sped off. That's because there are 2 gears in the game, but you don't switch between them with up or down as you do in Chase HQ or something like that. You first must get up to speed by pressing the B button, and then switch to A button for the higher gear. A little unusual perhaps, but I suppose when you're trying to steer, you don't also want to push up and down. It's odd that there's no brake, but then it's not one of those races where you'll really use it. The graphics are quite conservative, but what was put down is very effective. The races take place from a top-down perspective, but you can see far enough in front of you that you shouldn't get too caught out by the tracks. 6 cars can be displayed on screen at the same time, with very little flicker or lag to speak of. It's a shame all the cars look the same, but it's always clear which one's yours, so I guess it doesn't matter that much. The scenery varies nicely. It's obvious when you're in a city, with the buildings either side of the roads and train tracks that you cross on some stages, things of that nature. After each race you can spend a point increasing either your tyres, traction or cornering ability, or body, how much damage you can take. The top speeds never change, which possibly explains why you all drive the same car. Coming into contact with another car spins you around, but it doesn't seem to hamper you that much. You'll take a little damage, enough and you'll need to pit or suffer retirement, but typically you won't lose much speed, and with a slight direction adjustment you'll be right back on your way. What does harm you is if you crash too hard into the sides of the track. That brings you to a dead stop, but not only that, it flings you bodily out of the car, and you'll have to run road rash style back to it to rejoin the race. It amused me a couple of times, and then made me angry at my opponents after that, which is probably the intended response. Some tracks are circuits with laps. Some are point-to-point through city streets. You get 10 points for a win, and it seems that if you manage to beat the course record, you even get a bonus point. Others move away from the city into the forests, complete with rock obstacles littering the track. These will frustrate you, but thankfully, the opponents aren't immune to them either. The last lot of stages are at the beach, complete with water hazards that you have to jump over. Plenty of variation. Graphically, it's decent. Audibly, it's excellent. Fast-paced beats suitable for any tarmac shredding experience, each stage having its own unique theme, coupled with, what's that? Engine noise? Oh my days! The controls work perfectly. Some of the races are circuits, which inevitably mean that at times you'll be racing towards the bottom of the screen. Rather than make the baffling mistake that some racing games make, left and right turn the car to its left and right, rather than the left or right of the screen. You'd think that was common sense, but unfortunately that wasn't always the case. So, one game removed from what might well turn out to be the absolute nadir of the entire library, comes one of its much higher standard releases. Roadster is right up there with the greats like Micro Machines or V-Rally. These guys are much later on though. To get so much right in 1990 makes it even stranger that Roadster never left Japan. Soreyuke Amida-kun DMG-AMA, developed by Sofix and published by Coconuts Japan. In a library so replete with puzzle titles, you need to be doing something pretty special to stand out. When I find one that was Japan only, I feel a slight foreboding dread coming on. So many middle-of-the-road puzzlers came out on Game Boy in the West that you have to be going some to make one that wouldn't interest publishers over here. And doing what I'm doing, I'm going to have to play it and try to discover why it was never exported. In Amida, you're a cross between Kirby and Dizzy, just without any of the charm or innovation of those two. Your circular buddy wanders vertically down one of these parallel pipelines, only one of which has a safe endpoint. The other two have big skulls that indicate a horrible, horrible death. You need to guide him to the safe one. Thing is, the dude is pretty stupid and will just wander his stupid smiling way right into these traps. Why are we even saving this little dumbass? Natural selection wouldn't want us to. Along the way there are also death traps, on the pipes themselves or along connecting bridges. If Amida-kun comes to a bridge, he'll cross it, regardless of whether it's safe. The only control you have over his perambulation is this bridge with a face that you can move in between the 3 pipes. Press A to set it down and B to lift it back up. In doing so, you can guide him onto the safe path, bearing in mind that you'll often have to move him around several times in quick succession. This brings up my first dislike with the gameplay mechanic. Having to press A to lock the bridge in place and then B to move it again is unnecessary. It would have been much more fluid to just be able to move the path. Until you get into the habit of pressing B, you can be trying to move the bridge to the next location in the minuscule amount of time you have, only for it to not budge at all. The second thing I noticed that really gripes me, and this is a major one, is the fact that you only have 3 lives. That's not enough for a game like this. Often you want to try a level time and time again to get it right, and you can't here. Imagine in a game like Boxel if you only got a couple of goes and then it's game over. What if you'd spent 2 hours getting to level 40, only for the game to kick you in the nuts and say, "Sorry mate, you're done." Every 10 stages you get a password, but even so, 3 lives aren't enough. I hope you really enjoy redoing previously completed levels. The third thing that puts me off this game is perhaps subjective, but it's a big one, personally. The game's boring. I've lost interest by the 4th or 5th stage. There's very little appeal to sit and play through Soreyuke Amida-kun for very long. Nah, this one's not for me. Radar Mission DMG-RM, developed and published by Nintendo. All hands on deck, it's time for another round of naval warfare. Yep, Radar Mission is another battleship game. Technically this is the third one, as Navy Blue came out in Japan earlier, and depending on whether you consider Power Mission to be a battleship game. But actually this was the second one that we saw in the West. It's got a lot to stand up against, as I've already waxed plenty lyrical about my love for Pack-In Video's Battleship. Radar Mission is actually just as good. That's a bold claim, and you may be thinking at this point that I'm some oddball Battleship fanboy. I promise I'm not. I don't really care much for board games at all. It's just that these two titles have been a couple of stellar early releases. The music was a real plus point for me in the earlier game, and while none of the tracks are quite as awesome as that battle music from before, I really must praise the variation in Radar Mission. The song changes depending on how your battle is progressing. If the enemy gets you down to your last ship, the music speaks of foreboding dangers. Similarly, if you're not far from victory, the tune becomes more marching. The sound effects are effectively used too, and sound great, with a little klaxon-like aid if you miss by 1 square. Graphically, it's certainly on a par as well. The overview of the grid is smaller, but everything you need is there, and you get a handful of information boxes telling you what enemy craft remain, as well as your turn count. You can switch easily between your field and the opponent's with a touch of the A button, and the radar sweep across the grid looks pretty cool. The firing and sinking animations are very good. There are 2 game modes. Game A is the normal battleship style game, although there is a storyline to the campaign. You have a few options, an 8x8, 10x10 or 12x12 grid, and you can toggle the aircraft or near-miss sirens on or off, as well as Lucky Shot, which I'll detail later. The game progresses in a campaign mode, with 3 levels. This doesn't sound like much, but the levels take time. The first 2 in the campaign are at sea, and the final one sees you attacking the enemy HQ with tanks and a runway in lieu of the usual naval fighters. You only get a battleship and a destroyer with which to do this though. You have the usual assortment of ships to place and fight. Also, there's an option to launch an aircraft that looks like an FA-18 or something, that will take off, flying around between a few different squares, and you've got to take this out as well. I presume that if you manage to destroy the aircraft carrier before it takes off, it happens around turn 15 on the first level, then the plane goes down with it, but I've never managed this so can't tell you. Whereas before you had a range of special weapons at your disposal. Unfortunately they don't exist here, although there is something called a lucky shot. If you manage to fire a missile onto one of these predetermined lucky shot spaces, a few different effects can occur on your next turn, such as a spread shot or instant destruction of any ship hit. Game B is quite different, as in it's basically an entirely different game. Here you control a submarine moving left and right, targeting a number of enemy ships above the water. You move slowly when at the surface, but can increase your speed below depths. You need to surface to shoot anything, and the enemy submarine can still destroy you below. Fire torpedoes with A and machine guns with B, with unlimited ammo. The torpedoes are most useful for enemies at range. There are upgrades that you can buy between stages depending on how successful you've been. These increase your propeller speed, double your torpedoes to 2, and improve the sonar that you can use underwater to find enemies. Sure, it's not as addictive as the main game, but I have to give real credit for going the extra mile in adding this gameplay mode. Particularly notable here are the graphics and the Jaws-like theme music that speeds up when you're submerged. I really like these two games. Power Mission, not so much, and can't choose between them. Maybe I slightly prefer this one. Fortunately, I have both, so I don't have to choose. Gosh, maybe I am a fanboy. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/portablepowerpodcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.